Gentleman's recognized for 3 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to address the House and ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of my bipartisan bill, the Antisemitism Awareness Act, to ensure that we're standing up to the Jew hatred that's spreading like wildfire on campuses across our country. I'm proud to lead this legislation with my friend and fellow Problem Solver Caucus member, Congressman Mike Lawler from New York. As we are voting today, in real time, our country's universities are experiencing a tidal wave of anti-Semitism. Protesters have targeted Jewish students, haranguing them with awful Jew-hating insults and cheering on Hamas, a barbaric foreign terrorist organization that murdered Americans on October 7th and still hold 5 living Americans hostage, including my constituent, Idan Alexander. I met with hostage families just this morning. I saw these protests up close, like many Americans did, at Columbia earlier this month. I've heard the sickening, Jew-hating, anti-Semitic comments comparing Zionists to Nazis, promising a redux of October 7th 1,000 times over, and calling for resistance, I quote, by any means necessary, and intifada revolution. Intifada is used to call for violent uprising against Israel and Jewish people. These protests embolden Hamas, America's Iranian-backed terrorist. In fact, they've put out a statement lauding protesters as, quote, the leaders of the future. That's what our enemies said about the pro-Hamas protesters at these universities. Let me clear up any confusion, since I'm a huge champion myself of free speech. This bill protects the First Amendment. It allows criticism of Israel. I ensured that. It was critical to me. It doesn't allow calls for the destruction or elimination of the Jewish state. But it certainly allows criticism of Israel. Even more, it reminds us that our universities have a Title VI obligation to stamp out harassment on the basis of race, color, or national origin. Colleagues, we cannot stand idly by as protesters call for the deaths of Jews on college campuses and across the country. This bill will require the Department of Education to use the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, or IHRA, definition of anti-Semitism when carrying out Title VI investigations. IHRA's anti-Semitism definition is the most widely recognized in the world, used by 36 states. It condemns, 36 countries, I should say. It condemns traditional hatred and the ugly, modern anti-Semitism that we're seeing on college campuses. There shouldn't be anything controversial about this bill. As was mentioned when it was first introduced in 2018, 50 Democrats and Republicans co-sponsored this legislation, including members who are still in this body. Right now, the Department of Education has 137 active Title VI investigations, some of which have been open for years. The bill will give investigators a clear framework to evaluate anti-Semitism and finally harass.
The gentleman's time has expired.
Speaker, I yield the gentleman an additional minute.
The gentleman's recognized for an additional minute.
Thank you, Ranking Member. The bill will give investigators a clear framework to evaluate anti-Semitism and finally hold harassers accountable. Don't just take my word for it. 30 of our nation's leading Jewish groups back this bill. Under the last 3 administrations, the State Department has used the IHRA definition to monitor anti-Semitism worldwide. This bill takes a common-sense step to formalize the IHRA definition for our education systems. Again, 3 administrations accepted this definition of anti-Semitism. When I was at Columbia University last week, I told administrators that we need deeds, not words, to protect Jewish students. Colleagues, I'm making the same ask of you. This bill is a critical step we can take to stand against hate. I hope my colleagues on both sides of the aisle will join us in supporting this legislation and standing strong up against anti-Semitism. No excuses, no claims of commas that they don't like, just standing strong today against hate and anti-Semitism. It's what our country should stand for. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield.
And yields back. Gentleman from New York reserves. Gentleman from California is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield 2 minutes to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Molinaro.
For